Ni da 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 ma ma da 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 ya ya ya. Ni da ma 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 ma. Ni da da da. Ni da 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 ma ma da. Ni da 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 ni da 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 da. Dum bum bum ba di da 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 bum bum bo. Ha ha ha. Niram ba ya ru ra ba ra 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 Today will be our final shiur in Nativ Ahavat Hashem. I hope I didn't say that last time.
If you did, we won't quote you.
I didn't, right? Good. I might say it again next time. Okay. Anyhow, so this Nativ has taken us, Mamash, on a real trip, and as what?
As a native does.
As a Nativ does. That's right. It definitely does that. So last time we were in the Havchana of Yirat Hashem and Ahavat Hashem. This time we're going to be in Perek Bet again, to complete with something which actually relates us back to issues relating Avas Hashem and Torah and Limud Torah, which the Maharal expands upon greatly in both in Nativ HaTorah, especially in Tiferet Yisrael and the Hakdama to Tiferet Yisrael. Very rich explorations of the relationship between love and Torah, which are deserving of their own exploration. Bezrat Hashem, yeah, endless, you know. And then we'll start the review and everything in the light of everything else that we learned. You know? In any case, actually, if you wouldn't mind pulling down Netivot Olam Aleph and also the Rambam Sefer Hamada, and we might make some Sefer Hamada, and we might make some comparative explorations there too. Oh, great, you have one. So, and so in the meantime, let's take a look at where in the Nativ Avat Hashem, the Maharal brings up the discussion of the relationship between Torah and Ahava.
I might have to explain you to about
I think that might be that Matityahu has it. Yeah. So we might have to disappoint Matityahu.
What are we recording? Yes. No, I think
And let's see how it feels when we turn that fan off.
cool enough, actually.
Yeah, I think it's a beautiful day today.
Spring. We're actually in April.
It's the seasons have just been transformed, huh? It's just a whole different climate in Eretz Yisrael this year.
It's great.
It's been amazing. So we've been in Perek Bet in the discussion of Kiddush Hashem, and here in the these final sections, so the Maharal opens up the love of Hakadosh Baruch Hu and its relation to Torah in some rather odd Gemaras. Let's take a look at page Mem Zayin of Masechet Brachot. Amale Rav Papa LaAbaye, Maishna Kamei Dmitrachish Lahu Nisu, Maishna Anan Delo Mitrachish La Nisa. I don't get it. How come in previous generations people used to have miracles happen for them, and nowadays they just don't? Imishum Tanuye, if it's because of learning, Bishnei de Rav Yehuda Kulei Tanuye ben Azikin Hava. It can't be, because in the times of Rav Yehuda, people knew Nazikin. It's like they learned the Yeshivish Masechtas, you know. Va'anan kamatnitin shitas sidre. We learn all 6 starim of Mishnah. V'chi havamati Rav Yehuda be'uktzin ha'isha shekoveshet yerek b'kedera v'amei la'zeitim shekavshan b'tarfeon tohorin amar tavayos de Rav Shmuel kachazin hacha. When Rav Yehuda would get in uktzin to Mishnayos that have to do with things that are less familiar, Hishasha Koveshes Yerek, B'Kedera, things having to do with Tumah V'Tara, and therefore not halachot that are generally practiced and apparently weren't really learned so much. So he would say, "Oh my gosh, this is like these are like the hardest sugyas of Rav and Shmuel to learn this Mishnayos. This is not Mishnayos, it's like Gemara." And yet, was va'anan kamatninin bu'uktzin pleisa metivta. We have 13 yeshivas that are studying uktzin. I mean, it's like the level of Torah learning in our generation is just like, and the widespread spread of Torah learning is just like incredible compared to what they had. Ve'ilu Rav Yehuda kishalaf chad misane. Ata Mitra, but Rav Yehuda, when you would just take off one shoe towards taking a tainis to bring rain, the rain would come. Va'anan kamatzarina nafshan u'matzvach kachtzavchinan v'leit man demashgan ban. We were crawling out to a Kodesh Baruch Hu, yelling, fasting, and nobody's even paying attention, let alone answer us. So he answered him, right? This was a question, right, that Rav Papa asked Abaye. So Abaye answered him. Kamay havu kamasri nafshayu al kedushas Hashem. So the first people, the earlier generations, they were moser nefesh on kedushas Hashem. Ana lo masrinu nafshan al kedushas Hashem. We don't. Ki hadu Rav Ada bar Ahava. Like the story of Rav Ada bar Ahava, Chazi lahahi kutit dehavat levisha karbalta d'shuka. He once saw a non-Jewish woman. She was wearing red a red dress, like apparently a bright red dress, in the shuk, which was very immodest. What? Or temptatious. Savar Debat Yisrael, he thought she was a Jewish woman. Kam Kara Mina. So he went over to her and he tore the dress off. Iglai Milta Tekutiti, then it turned out that she wasn't even Jewish. Shaimua Ba'arba Meod Zuze. So they made him pay 400 zuz in court, punishment for having embarrassed this woman. Amala Mashmech. He said to her, what's your name? Amrele Matun. My name is Matun. Amala Matun. Arba Meot Zuze Shavye. Right, Matan is 200, so as you say 200 twice. But also, Matun, Arba Meot Zuze, also Matun means to be patient,
right?
To be moderate.
Yeah, exactly. Like,
so,
cool down there. 400 zoos later.
Right, exactly. But clearly he was reflecting that it was worth it to him. Although he might have also been more circumspect and asked her first before he ran into it. But it's a pretty wild example of Kiddush Hashem being Moser Nefesh, right? Being Moser Nefesh al Kiddushas Hashem. Kiddushas Hashem. So let's read a bit into the Maharal, and then we'll see what we can explore about this. They're explaining something to you. Od yoter ma'alat hamidah hazot, hamekadesh Shem Shamayim barabim. Even more about the Kiddush Shem Shamayim in public. V'amar she'al yedei hamidah hazot nasim liflot ba'olam. Through this midah, so miracles happen. Ki mishmo hanisim v'haniflot ba'olam. It's his name which brings about nisim and niflot. Ki hateva nidcha mipnei shmo yitbarach. The natural order of things is pushed aside. Ki hateva hi gashmit. Ve'en davar yoter miyuchad lanisim ra kiddush shmo. The natural way of things is the mechanical, the physical, the unchanging, boundaried. Ve'en davar yoter miyuchad lanisim ra kiddush shmo. And that which steps beyond that is the kiddush of his name. V'shul kach lo kara HaKadosh Baruch Hu et hayam lifnei Yisrael ad shekidesh Yehuda shmo berabim. It's a beautiful biur. They were praying, they were in trouble, doing everything they could, nothing until someone was willing to jump into the water. And that jumping into the water and that act of Kedusha, which obviously needs to be explained here, right? But nevertheless, this is the meaning of the pasuk Hayta Yehuda lekodsho. That Yehuda became God's kadosh, and being mekadesh his name by jumping into the water and risking his life in order to move things forward, somehow demonstrating in that Kedushas Hashem. And then the water split. Ve'az kasher kidei shmo hayahu yitbarach b'shmo machriv hayam uvakas hayam. That's when HaKadosh Baruch Hu changed the order of things such that now the water opened up and the dry land was exposed. Shetira mizeh ki ein davar yoter miyuchad lanisim k'mo kiddush shmo. You can see there that nothing is more dedicated to bringing nisim than kiddush Hashem. ותכף ומיד כאשר הם צריכים לניסים שלא בטבע ושלא כמנהגו מתחדש מן שמו להם ניסים בעולם שלא בטבע. That's when they have nisim. that go against the natural order. That's when there's something exposed about our creation that is beyond the natural order.
Interesting, specifically Rav Yehuda was talking about. That's the example.
Nice.
But it's Yehuda because it's not shown, right? And that's the
It's what I'm saying?
Shevet Yehuda.
Yes.
Right. B'Shevet Yehuda. Right, that's right. The Rava haya savar ki anisim bevadayim b'shvil haTorah. Rava. Right. Okay. So he apparently the printer and the Maharal are at odds here. he quoted it with Rav Papa, but actually the Maharal was reading with Rava. The Rava haya savar ki hanisim bevadayim b'shvil haTorah. The Fisha Torah Elukit. I mean, after all, the Torah is the divine expression, the divine mind. V'hi al hateva minhago shalolam medoche Torah hateva. I mean, doesn't Torah push aside the natural? Ve'amar im kein harei ata yoter him lomdim Torah mishmei de Rav Yehuda v'afilu hachei ayunisim b'mei Rav Yehuda v'doros elu inisim. So I don't get it. I mean, it should be therefore because there's more Torah learning, and there would be more that's above the nature of life. It's above the nature of the way things function, the mechanics of the world. No, you don't get it. It's about his name. It's about his name. That's the source for what's not the way things are. Techef, yeah, very much, yeah. Techef baiman, you see. So what seems to be going on here is a very profound interaction around the nature of the connection with the world and the divine presence. And what we see is apparently is that the Torah has more to do with the order of things and the way they are. And Kiddush Hashem has to do with the opening into something which is beyond the given order. It's when things actually step into a moment of liberation from the givenness of things, such that now, just like this human being chose to step beyond the normative rubric of behavior and demonstration of an absolute devotion and dedication to something that is not him, so then nisim occur. And specifically the Maharal says it has to do with this devotion to God's name, which is the way Chazal describe it, and the Torah never really says, Kiddush. Well, there's places in the Nevi'im of Kiddush Shemo, right? But the V'nigdash Ti, it's God really declaring about himself that I become Kadosh when you demonstrate this kind of dedication and devotion. But what you see is it's a fascinating thing of basically what's going on is that in the exposure of my absolute devotion, so then what happens is I step beyond the confines of the givens of the way things normally play themselves out. But the Torah, and the Maharal deeply explains this, and I'm looking forward to our learning at some point, the Tiva Torah. The Torah is really the exposure of the underpinnings of creation, the pattern, the fabric of creation, the way in which things are ordered such that the interactions between the different elements of creation function in a way in which they're following a pattern.
That's called Tiferet.
Tiferet, yeah, beautiful. Tiferet is the and Chazal actually say Lecha Hashem Hagdula V'Hagvura V'Tiferet. The Gedula, the Gevura is Yetziat Mitzrayim. I think there's different nuschaot there. The Gedula and the Gevura, Yetziat Mitzrayim and Kriyat Yam Suf, and Tiferet is Matan Torah, giving of the Torah, because the Tiferet is the middle column that integrates all the different expressions and all the different branches. And when that's discovered and that's exposed, so then everything really is given its place. But that doesn't bring about the miraculous. What that does is actually puts you in touch with the nature of the way things are. You discover like what this world is. You discover the truths in the sense of the unchanging principles and structures that this world is governed by. But you don't discover in that in a sense the personality that stands beyond that, such that you would be actually speaking to the author of that teaching in a way in which you'd say, yeah, it's one of the possibilities for what I could have written. It's one of the possibilities. When you speak to the author, so you discover that there's
perspective on the text. Yes.
Exactly. You get perspective. This is like this is indeed one of the possibilities, and that's a humility in learning Torah, which is very, very important, but only if it doesn't dull or dilute your passion and your enthusiasm about learning it. But it's like one of the possibilities. It's one of the possibilities. There are other possibilities, so to speak, that God could have created, and in fact, He seems to have tried out a few before He made this one, and that is therefore something which indicates to us that this kaviyachol, a will. I mean, this is obvious, but it's worth stating anyway. There's an infinite range of possibilities that can emerge out of existence, and this particular world which we live is a very specific and particular modality of that expression of existence. And it has its structure, it has its mind, it has its vision, it has its patterns. But they're not the only possibility. It could have been otherwise. It could have been otherwise. And this is a very, very important recognition for any awareness of the divine. Not just not for pallid, although significant issues of being able to hold sometimes contradictory and varying approaches, opinions, etc., etc. Right? We're not talking about that. That's actually a subject which is, in a sense, a different subject, right? Although it's connected. But we're talking about multiple universes, multiple possibilities in which there are multiple Torahs, which, as the Ramban says at the beginning of his Perush in the Chumash, is actually letters, which themselves are a particular expression and modality, which really could have organized into many different ways, and this is a particular one in which this has organized into. And this Chazal actually teach us when they say, Dibra Torah kilshon bnei Adam. The Torah speaks our language, which, on the one hand is convenient, right? And the compliment, is what but exactly. But as soon as you say that it's speaking your language, so you've already delimited and specified the nature of the divine revelation. It's about your language, and we've explored this in different ways. I believe in these contexts also. If you remember the Rambam in the Moreh about Vayi b'Shalach Sa'am, right, taking us out of Mitzrayim and not taking us the short route because people might see the war and then turn around and want to go back. And therefore he took them derech hamidbar Yam Suf to avoid what? The war with the Plishtim. And the Rambam, in his just, beautiful and simple way of seeing things, says, it's obvious that in terms of the omnipotent Lord, he could have arranged that the Plishtim would have, gone to the beach that day or something. It's like it didn't have to be that when they would approach Eretz Plishtim, they would end up at war. HaKadosh Baruch Hu's got many methods for blinding people, for dulling their senses. It wasn't that hard for him to arrange that he'd be able to do things the way he wanted to, which apparently was to bring them right to Eretz Yisrael. He says we hear him thinking about it, like we hear God thinking about it. I really like to, but I can't because so I'm going to do it this other way. And we're going to end up with all kinds of stuff like Kriyat Yamsuf, Matan Torah, the Man, 40 years in the wilderness, which also is a result of a mishap. Right? Most of the Torah, as I think we pointed out in the past, and you'll be welcome to what? Most of the Torah is these mishaps. It's like mistakes. I was very into this last night. It's like exactly. So it's
or tax.
So the Torah is written. The Torah is written of these errors, right? Now that's something which the Rambam says that you're a sick person if you're not willing to see that. Literally, he says you're chole if you're not willing to see that, because basically the deepest sickness is an unwillingness to touch reality. It's the deepest sickness is when, like we saw in Parshas Naso, the Sota, just like living a fantasy. When you start living a fantasy, so you're looking for your fantasy to be what reality is. That's no different, the Rambam implies. That's no different than trying to avoid the facts of life, that there are heuristic processes in which there's mistake, correction, and more deeply, there's an interactive nature to our relationship with God. And worse, there's an interactive nature to the Torah that he gives us. You mean to say that the Torah is actually responsive to our weaknesses, limitations, needs, like disabilities?
That's a good chunk of the Torah.
It's like it is. It's hard to find where things happened in the Torah that went according to God's big plan.
At least the first 10, 15, well, not even actually. The first one. Yeah.
Well, okay. But in any case, right, this is a very, very crucial recognition about the nature of what it means to be living in Hashem's world in a brit with Him. It means that not only do we have a Torah that we sometimes make mistakes in, about and don't manage to keep properly and this and that and all that's definitely true. But the Torah itself is a product of this kind of an interaction between us and Hashem Yisbarach. Now, the reason that's relevant to what we're talking about right now is because there's a kind of a malleability about it, which is a deep indication that it's got other possibilities out there that could be. What would it said in the Torah if the Meraglim actually had come back and said it's a great place and we're going? What would have happened if Yosef hadn't been sold into slavery? what would have happened if the people were brave enough that HaKadosh Baruch Hu said, we're going straight to Eretz Yisrael. We're taking the 3-day route. It's like, not cutting across Yam Suf, nothing. Not cutting across Midbar Sinai, nothing. Right? Totally. so what would the Torah have said had it not been that there is this non-mechanical, emergent process in which there's a interaction of elements that then end up with something other than the original plan, right? That's a very deep teaching, and what it is a teaching of is this. It's a teaching of that reminds us that beyond the Torah, so to speak, is now to put it back in the Maharal's terminology, is the name. Beyond the Torah is the name. What does it mean that beyond the Torah is the name? Beyond the Torah is the name means that beyond the Torah is a selfhood, so to speak, of the divine that is forever in liberty to take all there is and completely redo it. And so profoundly, right? The Torah, HaKadosh Baruch Hu chooses, right? Reality plays out, that it would be the water that becomes the demonstration at Kriyat Yam Suf of this power. Because in the Torah, right after Bereshis bara Elokim es hashamayim v'et haaretz, whatever that means, right? Let's just, v'haaretz hayta tohu v'avo, v'choshech al pnei tehom, right? V'ruach Elokim merachefet al pnei hamayim, right? It's the water that's the primordial presence of this very vague and amorphous pattern, nevertheless, that takes the shape of the shape of its container, but nevertheless has already some kind of an imprint of a pattern that makes it into a substance, and so it's going to be that which to indicate that forever there's beyond is a reflection of that forever there is a beyond that is demonstrated through Kriyat Yam Suf. It's like the water. Yes, it's the water. Okay. Yeah. Even the reality is fluid. Right?
Fluid dynamics are very difficult now.
So this when we touch this, we're touching something which is a reflection of really this power, the power of miracles, the power of nisim, that things can happen that are really not structured and limited by what is the Torah, what the Torah is. So
it actually deepens the question. It actually deepens Rav question, which is in other words, if the Torah really does represent this infinite potential possibilities, then engaging in the Torah should spark that. Should be able to access.
I wasn't saying that. The opposite. Yeah, I think. Yeah, I'm not sure that I communicated it well. It's not that the Torah represents the infinite possibilities. The particular Torah that we have is a particular Torah, and exactly it takes the form. It takes the form of the container. In other words, it's come down and it's taken the form of the container. Right? It has its own. It has first, but even then, even as water, it has a particular structure and pattern which is appropriate to this specific among infinite possibilities of what creation would be. It has this particular pattern which is the primordial matter out of which things come. Yeah. So this is a very deep invitation And on a certain level, I have a sense that ironically, right, and it really is ironically, there's something which happens with Ruth and Naomi, which reflects a similar kind of a process. Because if you look at the psukim with Chazal, at their decisive moment, their decisive moment. So so you see that Naomi is pressing Ruth and Orpah to drop it. It's just not going to play out in your favor. You've got lives ahead of you. Go back to where you came from. Even if you would wait for me many years and I would actually become pregnant and then wait for me, I mean, this is just, it's the wrong way to go, right? And they're crying and they're crying and they're crying. And then finally Orpah kisses Naomi and parts from her. Virut davkaba. But Ruth, she stuck with her pride. She was dveikaba, right? She was clean to her. And Chazal actually say, Ma bein dvuka lenashuka. What is between the dvuka and the nashuka? They emphasize this as being the definitive distinction. And it's so definitive, right, that later Orpah, right, has
a tough reputation.
Yeah, all kinds of stuff happened that night, right? And she just completely is mafkir herself to men, animals, dogs, you name it, and apparently from some bizarre genetic combination of all that, we end up with Goliath.
And his brothers.
And his brothers, yeah. These are like mamish, like Kelev Yechidati. David HaMelech is probably talking, according to some midrashim, like that's David HaMelech talking, not Esther. It's like a Hatzila, Kelev Yechidati. Right? It says so that's Goliath. But Ruth ends up as the mother of Malchut and of David. But the way Chazal identify, and there's like a lot to open up here, but just the way Chazal identify the difference is in this question of Nishika or Dvika. And you hear what's going on, because Nishika, listen to this, right? Nishika
defines it as the separation.
Nishika is each entity standing on its own in a emotional cathexis, in this intense emotional moment, which is connective, but is actually connective and departing at once. Right? Dvika has a different implication here. And in order to appreciate it, so you have to see also that Chazal described that what Naomi was pushing her on, Ruth responded to by saying, Al tifke ibi. Don't push it. Don't push it. And Chazal interpret that to mean, don't push it. Listen, if I don't go with you, then I'll find some other way in. I love you. I love you. But I'm not dependent on my life being connected to you. If you push me away, I will find another way in. This is how Chazal describe what happened. On a certain level, it has to be that way because if it was entirely related to Naomi and having to do with some sense that it's got to be through Naomi, then it would be a question about the Gerut itself. There needs to be this a very different perspective, and the different perspective is, and this is something which is so deep. The different perspective is that her experience of Naomi is what Naomi is an embodiment of in the flesh. But what Naomi is an embodiment of in the flesh is not dependent upon Naomi. I'll explain what I mean. It's something that in a sense it's not so pleasant to talk about, especially, people who are married, and people who aren't married probably shouldn't talk about it. And that is that there's people who we're in love with. People we're in love with, that the Torah initially describes as Al Ken Yazov Ish et Aviv et Imo v'davak b'ishto. It's the most primal description of a empowered relationship. Empowered, I mean empowered in the sense of freely chosen, leaving the confines of your heredity, leaving the confines of your genes, leaving the confines of the ancestral nest, and stepping out empowered. And the davak, the ishto. Now, what is this v'davak b'ishto about? So incredibly, the Torah actually told you what it was about, right? The Torah said to you that dvekut is about you. The reason you're davek with the woman, as the Chumash explains, is because she came from you. It's a me'atzamai. Basar mibsari. Alkein yikarei isha. Right? That's a very deep teaching about the nature of the love that we have as being. I'll just say it out, and then we'll explain why it's not other things that people might think of it. As love as being a discovery of self. Love is a discovery of self. That's the way the Chumash presents it. Love is not only a discovery of self, it's a completion of self. But not in the narcissistic, selfish sense of I am doing this for me, but rather in the holistic sense of I am not a separate island which lives on perfectly well without intercourse, without interconnection, without interrelationship. No. Your selfhood itself, from the very establishment of your selfhood, is partial, and the loves that you experience have to do with a sense of yourself having outside of you parts of you that are there that are in need of integration. Yeah.
I'm just missing a piece where in the Chumash it's framed in terms of halashon of love.
Okay, well, could we wait with it? I'm talking about dvuka now. What do you mean love?
But you talk about love.
Of course I am. Yeah, of course I am.
So I'm confused.
Okay, Seder. We'll see in a minute. Yeah, and I think we've seen it already in the Maharal, how he identifies dvekut and ahava from the beginning. Yeah. With love being this the movement towards wholeness, right? This from the beginning of the Nativ. He's about that. He's about that. But he'll say it even more explicitly. But it's a good point. That needs to be pointed out. But trust me for now.
Okay.
So that v'davak is originally introduced as being an awareness that this is myself. It's on one level it's about you because you hold that. On another level, it's not about you at all. It's about me. But again, that can become extremely self-involved, narcissistic, and really the undoing of love. Or it can become this very, very deep sense that no, the nature of identity itself is only present by virtue of the openness to its interaction and interconnectivity with those who are beyond itself. Now that if you think about it in your life, like the people who you love. So on one sense, there's a particular person, and that's the meeting point. In another sense, and everyone's spouse should live on Ne'ev Esrim, v'chule v'chule. Nevertheless, nevertheless, there is such a thing as zivug sheni. There's such a thing as zivug sheni. There's such a thing as there being something that is present in the universe that is expressing through this particular woman, but doesn't have to express dafka through this particular woman. There are other access points. There are other embodiments. And that's why I was jokingly saying before, this is something which can be very confusing to someone not married and becomes very, very real to someone who's deep in marriage, that on the one hand, I mean, this is the woman I love. It's like there is no other. There can't be any other. And yet we know that there's something that's coming through this woman when love is deep. There's something that's coming through this woman which is far beyond this particular woman. She is the embodiment of something which is so vast and yet so pinpointed in its appropriateness to me. And that gives me an ability to have contact in love with it. But if we step aside from the romantic, right, which becomes so easily devolved into the infatuated and limited, we step aside from that and not worry about saying these things. So we know that the reason that those who we love are so intensely loved by us, because there's something which we resonate together with them in this universe that we're both part of. We're both in, so to speak, attuned to the same resonance. We're both attuned to that same expression. And whether it be, if you want to intellectualize it, the same values, the same perspectives, which is not always the case at all, right? That would be the wrong way to put it. But somehow, perspectives that complete each other, that will end up, unraveling like all of the secrets of love, right? And we'll write a popular book about it someday.
Well, that's important because they can be highly functional in a technological sense.
Right.
They can be highly, these are worthwhile things, but they're derivative of what you're talking about.
Exactly. Right. Yeah, very much. But the point is that what this meeting is experienced as being is something which is a joined consciousness, which is a joined presence, which is really representative of something. Representative is the wrong word, but like the focusing, expressive, the focusing, the embodying of something which is far more than what this particular person is, or what I, in my particular personality, am. And we know that about ourselves too. I mean, there were myriad ways in which our lives could have unfolded. We know that.
Falling in love is actually, if you take it in the healthy direction you're speaking about, one of the primary things that teaches us that. Because if I remain the same me as I was before I fell in love,
yeah,
and then I'm experiencing my love really as expressive of me, that's where the selfishness sets in. Whereas if it's actually transformative and I realize, wow, this is me. So yeah, of course this is me, like you said, the completion of self.
Right.
So from that perspective, it's a healthy statement because it's reflective of the transformation that I went through.
Absolutely.
Come into this, but to hold on to the past consciousness, then it becomes possessive, selfish.
Exactly.
And going through, right? I mean, it's a constant. It seems like it's a constant challenging. Right?
Definitely not like,
to the point of saying, okay, then there's the wholeness,
right?
Yeah.
That's right.
Absolutely.
Right. It implies this kind of a dynamic, that it's not like just in the same way stepping into it needs to recognize that the entities are not complete and independent, but rather interdependent and mutual in their growth. That not only implies that about their nature, but it also implies about their growth as it never having arrived, because there's always the changes that continue to bring about the interactions that grow and
love grows.
Yeah.
You see it in people who really love each other. It just
yeah.
spreads.
Okay. And very much relies on perceiving things this way. On perceiving things this way. Exactly. I know. Of course I'm going there. Of course I'm going there. Of course I'm going there. I'm so glad you said it. Yeah, because the Gemara has that famous statement, right? Kasha zivugam kekriyas yamsuf. And the Gemara says, wait a minute, but wasn't there a soul? Yeah, exactly, a soul mate that was already established 40 days before conception. So the Gemara answers and says, well, yeah, but kriyas yamsuf is zivug sheni, because what kriyas yamsuf is showing is exactly this. The zivug rishon is where, so to speak, the natural, almost mechanistic order takes you to, right? But the zivug sheni is when you've got to step beyond and say, like Ruth saying to Naomi, if it's not you, then it'll be someone else. Which is not to say that I don't love you. It's just to say that I recognize that you are, my love of you is a love of something which has become embodied in you, but can become embodied in other ways. It's like such a deep reversion, because this actually then makes Matan Torah into an entirely different sort of revelation. Because the difference between experiencing Torah as the one and only way which God has, the one and only possible way for God to speak and to do, is to say that actually now the relationship I'm entering into is only explicitly and exclusively with Torah. And it's to forget about what it is that Torah is embodying, which is the presence of the divine who stands beyond the Torah and had many other ways in which he could have become kiviyachol, expressed and manifested.
Part of the whole.
So that shift in stance shifts also your relationship with Torah. Instead of it being something which, so to speak, God has trapped you into, it becomes an offering of a connection with me that is wholly appropriate to the particular way that you are. I'm offering you something. I'm offering you something which is a modality for yourself to become fully realized in the context, yes, in the context in which you have been created. Do you see that? If you can see that, so then you discover that Torah is not about some kind of a limitation which by nature means there's you in your independent entityhood, and there's God in his independent entityhood, and now he's imposing this Torah upon you, which is really where Shavuot failed, because that was the experience of Klal Yisrael, which God says to us, you're Kfiyei Tova. You're experiencing this as being imposed upon you. The good is being imposed upon you in Avodah Zarah and Daf Hey, right? But instead, what I'm offering you is me in all of its expansiveness, but expressed in a way in which we can meet.
It's so critical, that last phrase, because just remembering all the Torahs that he talks about, the Zot, El Kodesh. It's so easy to hang up with that in life with grand ideas and vast visions that it's only in the particularity that anything means.
Yeah, that's right.
It's only in the particularity that anything means.
The presentation, though, of that moment.
Which one?
Of Matan Torah. It doesn't necessarily, at least at first blush, present itself as the type of moment of interaction and connection. And you have the brakim and the kolot and the shaking and the smoke.
You never fell in love, man?
It's frightening.
It's overwhelming.
It even kills them.
It's overwhelming. It's overwhelming. That's the Maharal points this out. That its overwhelming nature is exactly the problematic, and also the most profound indication of exactly what I'm talking about, because its overwhelming nature is both the indication that is both the indication that there's a powerful passion that lies behind this, and also that, in a sense, there is really no other way in this world. There is no other way in this world. And that's why on the same daf in the Gemara, I'll explain this more in a moment, in the same daf in the Gemara in Masechet Shabbos, you have both all the midrashim around Nasiv and Nishma, where they just threw themselves into it. And Kaf Alem Har Kegigit, that he warned them that if they don't accept it, they're going to be covered over here as their grave. So the Maharal explains in Tiferet Yisrael that they're one and the same thing. Actually, he explains it even more in Or Chadash, his Perush on Purim. It's very, very worthwhile seeing the Hakdama to Or Chadash for Shavuos, because this is where he explains this. Yeah, it's very kedai. Because sure, that's Purim is when Shavuos gets its tikkun. Okay, great. Yeah, just like Purim is the tikkun for Shavuos, just like Hanukkah is the tikkun for Sukkot. Right? The reason these don't contradict, but actually empower each other, better word for that, they complement each other, is because that's exactly the point. For someone to experience a na'aseh v'nishma and be willing to throw himself in love into this relationship without having heard what its requirements are, is because he experiences this as being the nature of his self.
Beyond.
I don't need you to spell it out. Just like when someone really finds their mate, they would be fools and really almost deriding of the power of the relationship if they say like, I want to hear it all spelled out exactly where this is going to be. Are you insane? No, I need to know like exactly where we're going to send the kids to school and where we're going to live and this. And you can ask those questions, but if that's what the relationship amounts to, then obviously you're on the wrong track, because there needs to be this element that is basic, that I'm just willing to throw myself into that, not because I'm just willing to lose myself, but the opposite. I realize that just like myself evolves and unfolds, so also I see myself as evolving and unfolding with you. And that means before you could say anything about what it's going to mean and what it's going to be, that's the real Na'aseh v'nishma, but you understand what you're saying. Because what you're saying is also that in this current reality, this is the only way it can be, baby. Can't be any other way. So that's the same thing as saying you're dead if you walk out on this. This is why Ruth, speaking to Naomi, can say both. Look, if you keep pushing it, then I'll find someone else. And also say, Hamavet yafrid beini uveinech. Death will do us part. That's where it comes from. Right? What are you saying? Both things. Because on the one hand, I experience myself as being completely entwined with you. And on the other hand, I know that my experience of you is not limited to you in that particular sense. It's about me and my becoming who I need to become. And therefore, there might be other routes for me to do that when it comes to Naomi as opposed to another woman, not when it comes to Torah as opposed to some other Torah. Okay?
It just seems to me that you've gone all the way to saying it would just be a different world.
It would just be a different world, exactly.
It would just be a different world.
Right.
There is no me as you know me in relationship to someone else getting the same thing.
Right.
What is now, and we can have that together, or something else will be.
Yeah, right, exactly. Right, or something else will be.
The Malachim don't want to give up on that infinite potential.
That's right.
Moshe.
That's right.
So that to her.
That's right. This is exactly. So,
because there's still all the multiplicity of futures.
yeah.
It
Time.
kills all those other futures.
Time, exactly.
But that the giving over the Torah doesn't exclude from those other possibilities. Isn't that the reason they give over
No,
the Torah to Moshe?
Yeah,
It's because they realize, oh, you're not getting the infinite, you're getting that small piece of.
It's not a contradiction of the infinite.
well, they don't really give in to Malachim. They just
God just grabbed the throne.
they just get burned up, which is exactly the point. If what you are standing for is the maintenance of an infinite potential, then that's basically saying that there is nothing.
Nothing particular will happen.
Yeah. So basically, they revert. They revert to that fire, which is the original light, the original energy. Is that what you want? Boom, here it is. But if it's going to be about a particular avenue, which is the only way to love, it's the only way to love is in a particular avenue. It's in the faithfulness of it. It's in the commitment to it. It's in the willingness, ironically, right? Sometimes paradoxically, to give yourself up for it. That itself then becomes the demonstration that what it's about is not about you in the limited sense, but it's about a much broader vision of your participation in a universe which is vastly beyond the particular in the flesh of you. Because, baby, it's just like if it's not going to be you, it will be someone else who will express what it is that I see in you. Well, that's the same about you too. That's the same about you too. That is the moment of Kiddush Hashem. That's the moment when you give up this particular embodiment for the devotion and dedication to that which is beyond the particular embodiment. And when you do that, you're touching the name in a way in which now, beyond the particulars of the way in which the mechanics of this universe function, you're able to touch something which is beyond those particular mechanics. And then a nace can happen. Do you hear how this works?
Why did we go back in the direction of nace? I mean, I know we've.
Just because of what we're learning.
No, I know.
But I want us to appreciate what a deep teaching this is. It's almost as if Kriyat Yamsuf needed to happen before Matan Torah. It's like, okay, let go. Like the whole thing could be completely different, right? It's only because of my particular love of you. The only thing that's here is this particular world for you. So now can we talk? Now we can talk. It's in a sense like the Kriyas Yamsuf and the Kiddush Hashem, that I'm dedicated to you, God, beyond the particular avenue in which you might become expressed. I'm dedicated to you. Okay, fine. Now that's happened, I've watched Yehuda do that. You all saw what's going on. You all saw, so to speak, Zivug Sheni before there was even a Zivug Rishon. So now we can talk about what it is to be in this particular relationship. And we all go through this on a certain level, in choosing a particular person to love, to be dedicated to, and be devoted to. There's no other way. You can't just be devoted and dedicated to the all in a way in which there's no particular expression in the specific. You're fooling yourself because you yourself are expressed in the specific. Yeah.
As a question, even a little bit of a kasha for me, is that if the connecting through Kiddush Hashem to something beyond the particular manifestation, and its devotion to the essence, as it were, then the miracles we're speaking about are fixings, more accurate representation in this particular existence. Because let's not forget, things were going along in a certain way. Rav Yehuda says we need rain. Takes off his shoe.
Right.
Before he can ever take off his shoe, it rains, because that's more expressive of essence now. There's a more correct way in which things are supposed to play out. I'm worried about what name, and it's not expressed as just of essence.
We're still within.
Ground.
It's still
There's
in this
middle
world.
ground
Yeah.
here, because
I hear you.
Moshe killed him b'shem meforash. So that means, because in that Moshe, that moment, really, the way that particular manifestation was not as fit to something, because in essence, of course, it was as fit as anything else, because
Always. Okay. Well, always there's a mechanics to the way things are playing out, and there's an essential will which stands behind, and does not always come to the expression in the mechanics at the moment that you need it. So, yeah.
So it's expressive of the ultimate partnership. Meaning, if we weren't able to somehow ourselves look at this particular manifestation and say, this is not the deeper will, and access a deeper relationship to the deeper world, even though, yes, ultimately, we're not accessing essence, because there would be no
No, this is not an access of essence. No.
And so but that itself is what ties, so to speak, the particular.
Yeah, it is. It's tying us to the Ratzon, still within the context where we're still within the context of this world. Right? These Nisim are still within the context of this world.
That relates to my real question. So, how do you know the name? I mean, the people do things in devotion to higher causes and conceptions of essence all the time.
Yeah, like, how do you know the name? How do you know that your martyrdom
or
is...
even you're taking off your shoe to fast for rain.
Ah.
I mean, obviously the martyrdom is an extreme mechanic example of having we feel it in our flesh in the world today.
Yeah.
But the agency, the freedom that's taken in saying I see things should go this way. It should rain, right? As opposed to, this is Ratzon Hashem, we should suffer.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
well, what you're pointing out is very beautifully this interplay, because on the one hand, your experience of thirst and the need for rain and the drought and hunger that's coming by virtue of it is a very, very much a this worldly experience. And your non-acceptance of it is a access to a deeper will about the nature of the way things ought to be. Yeah. Which is built on your experience of the current reality.
But it's that's no less real for Rav Papa than it is for Rav Yehuda. That's the key.
Mm-hmm.
Is that Rav Papa's thirst is just as real as Rav Yehuda's, and they both have the sense.
That's right.
The difference is Rav Yehuda lived in a world that was meluma b'kiddush Hashem.
Mm-hmm. Right.
That's how they walked in the world. Then that implies that they had a sense of what the Shem should look like, so to speak, in the world that we don't have.
Mm-hmm. 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 Right. And they're not confined to the particular expression which is happening right now, which is that there's a drought. There's a seeing that there's a deeper will that's standing behind the drought, which is not coming to expression through it, which now I'm going to access.
Which they see elsewhere. And so therefore, in seeing it in this particular drought, they're more able to reconcile, so to speak, that higher will and what they want, and therefore the world shifts. And because they see it elsewhere, they see it everywhere, they train themselves to see it. So whereas Rav Papa, they're seeing it now because it hurts.
They've trained themselves to see it, not only to see it intellectually, but to live it. To live it. To live it. And there's something which I believe is very, very profound in this. About this, this woman who's wearing this karbalta shuka. It's like because I think the reason it's that is because that's the difference. It's lust as opposed to a relationship of love. In other words, what she is doing is arousing a desire for her in her specific fleshiness only, divorced from any kind of a personality beyond that. This is what you're doing, lady, and that's not a livable reality in a world of people who are moser nefesh to kiddush Hashem. It's not going to be Rav Adabar ahava. That's going to be Okay.
Well, it's not like he had a conversation.
Right. Well, they're very
Yeah.
beautiful that he's the man who is the teacher. He's a teacher of love. He's a teacher of love. It comes out in this obviously challenging and difficult path.
He's telling you what is not love.
But exactly, and saying this, I believe that this has to do also with something that happens with Ruth. It's because obviously we're like Erev. It's like an amazing thing that that Naomi tells her when she's going to Boaz. She tells her, so v'rachatzt v'sacht, right? V'halachta lagoren. You wash yourself, you anoint yourself, v'hitlabasht, I think, or lavasht, or hitlabasht, and then you go down to the goren, right? And then, so the pasuk describes that she went to the goren, and she did everything her mother-in-law had said. Right? So Chazal say, wait a minute. She went to the goren and then did what her mother-in-law had said? Wait a minute. Why didn't she first, like her mother-in-law said? Her mother-in-law said, first wash, anoint yourself with oils and perfume, then put on the really nice clothes and head out for the goren. So Rashi there, I don't know if you have Rashi there, Rashi here, it's beautiful Rashi. It's from the Medrash. Rashi says, Ruth listened to Naomi. And she said, here, give me that, just a second. Anyhow. Ruth listened to Naomi, and then she said to herself, "What if I do what she said? People are going to think I'm a whore."
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So instead, the order needs to be reversed. So that first I go to the goren, I'll find myself a place to get dressed and wash, etc., and then I'll go in. Now, so you look at that and you say, like, okay, Beseder, she's a smart lady. No, she's a much more than just a smart lady. This is a pivotal moment, because if you look in Megillus Ruth, so you see that Ruth basically disappears in the decree and the Ketiv, right, all along.
Extension of Naomi.
Yeah, all along, she's just completely, she's gone, right? If you just look right, the Eli is missing inside. Eli, Kiamar Eli. She's.
The pronounced suffix are in Ketiv are of Naomi and not of Ruth.
And when Ruth, when Ruth hears from Naomi that you are to go down there, so she says v'yaradati. Naomi says about herself. I mean, she's completely become dveika in Naomi to the point where there's no apparent distinction between them. Ruth has disappeared. Naomi's talking about herself doing it as if when Ruth goes to do it, she will be doing it. And what the heck is going on? And then Chazal catch it. It's so profound. Chazal catch it. Yeah, it's true. They're in a total dveikut with each other. They really have become basar echad. And because she has given up this, I call it, entitude, it's like of being a separate entity and an discreteness. Thank you. An island of her, an island of her own, right? She's given that up. So I see. So she's like completely lost herself, huh? Right. Until it becomes this moment of, are you a whore? Because the whore is that too, where there's whoring around. Any man. It's any guy. It's any guy. It's any possibility for who's going to pick me up, as long as I can get something out of it. That is the defining feature between whether what I'm doing is basically I've given myself up for my gain, or we have really discovered a much more expansive meaning to identity than has ever been known before, and really has ever been known before. Ruth introduces this, and this is why she becomes Ima Shel Malchut. She is the supernal mother of Malchut in the sense of aim. The way Chazal mean aim. There's Av and there's aim. There's principles and there's source root. She is the Ima Shel Malchut in that. But you see how it's defined by the question of what does this look like? What does this look like? And so in the same sense, right, it comes out very beautifully, right? In the same sense, what Rav Yehuda is, Rav Ada bar Ahava is devoting to is just not that. Do you understand how that destroys the true nature of a meeting between a man and a woman? What you're doing, don't you realize the way you're dressed, honey, is a destruction of the possibility for a different kind of a merging between male and female than the one that you are inculcating and wearing that red dress? So in his Mesirut Nefesh to the shame, he's Moser Nefesh to that which lies beyond the fleshy lusting into an intercourse with reality which is full of passion, but is not a selfish and taking passion. It's a sharing one. It's a sharing one. You see, this becomes mamish like it becomes the perfect inverse. And this is it's the only place where you find that Ruth did other than what Naomi said. And it's specifically around that issue because that's the issue. And it plays itself out. It continues to play itself out. She goes in there. Okay, I see you. She goes in there and she's Vayilafes, and he's like it's a very compromising situation, obviously. And then he says to her, Lini pohalayla, you stay here tonight. What? Stay here tonight? But he can't sleep with her. I mean, what is going on? We're talking about a relationship which is specific and love, and clearly in love, but beyond the particular embodiment, and yet involved in the particular embodiment at the same time. I hope I'm saying this clearly. These are very subtle interplays. It's like watching it, here and then not here, and here and then not here at once, and that's the deepest mode of connectivity.
Kabbalah sends her away in the morning too.
Right. Alti vadili ish. I just want to make this, right, we're holding a context of Matan Torah and Kiddush Hashem when we're looking at that story. If you hold that context, you see that there couldn't be a better story to tell as an introduction to the nature of Matan Torah and the way we're going to be entering into this relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu than the story of Ruth and what she reflects. Because if she's reflecting this expanded self, then she's also expressing what saves us from having an experience of Torah as being some kind of an external imposition upon us.
It's her second marriage. And the Medrash takes pains to point out that it was Boaz's second marriage too. They came back to
okay, fine.
For his first wife.
Okay, fine. But do you hear what I'm saying about the nature of Matan Torah and what it offers in the context of Ruth? Yes. Okay, that's a beautiful and appropriate additional detail. Yeah.
I mean, I have lots of other questions, but the one that was bullet here was, it's like I want you to walk through that same set of steps for the Yehuda and Tamar story.
She dresses up just
what is she dressed like, and what was that fine line that was being treaded? And is this a tikkun on that, or were those both together coming together?
There's no question that the three primary stories of the birthing of David HaMelech and ultimately of the Mashiach are all stories about women taking the initiative and bringing the men to sleep with them. That's how Ruth was born from Lot's daughter. That's how Peretz was born from Tamar's tempting of Yehuda. And that's how Oved is born, and ultimately Yishai and David, by Ruth's drawing out Boaz. But they become more and more refined, even though they remain the same format. The first one is incest. It's as raw as it gets. It's the daughter sleeping with the father who's dead drunk. It's the next one. The next one, right, is her it's a beautiful interplay, right? Because they're trying to, they think they're saving the world,
They each get into
and they do it in the most
extenuating
primal way.
They each get
Then we have, right? They each what?
They each get extenuating circumstances.
Okay.
So
Then
Or there's a higher ideal.
then with Yehuda and Tamar, so it's not daughter, it's daughter-in-law, right? It's daughter-in-law, which is obviously much more refined interaction, and also the way it's gone about. He's not dead drunk. He chooses, right? And
There's an element of lust in it nonetheless.
no, but there's an element of lust. Here, the lust is gone. And that's exactly why it's important for him to say to her, Lini po halayla, you can stay here tonight, you're safe. I'm not going to sleep with you. And you know what? You know what? Im yigalech, there's someone else who's actually more entitled to this. Im yigalech tov,
I'm not the only
if he, I'm not the only possibility. Not the only possibility. I love you. Okay? But I'm not the only possibility. BT, my daughter, referring back all the way back to Lot. It's correct. It's fine. Another possibility. They thought, and this is why the intensity of the incestual is so present, also psychologically. It's like there's no other options. That's the most intense expression, no other options. And that was what they actually thought about what had happened. There's no other options. The world is destroyed. The only way it's going to be saved is this one right here now. Oh, man. Because I'll say, where did he get drunk from? Oh, there was a cask of wine left over from Gan Eden, from the tree of knowledge. Right here now about me. I get it. We've been here before. It's a Gemara, a Medrash. But instead, he says to her, Im yigalech tov, you know, if the other one takes you, so he will take you. And that's fine.
That's good too.
And it's good. And if he doesn't, I'm here. I'm here.
Shanat Ishna Alo. How does that occur in Chazal? I mean, in the Gemara, when Rabbi Yehuda taking off his shoes.
Okay, you're finding another connection. Okay, that's it.
Which is allowed in Ezekiel.
That's right.
But that's exactly what happens, right? You know, v'zot al hatmura, right? The shoe is given over al hatmura. Like tmura is
Alternatives.
alternative.
And they both become custom.
This and that, and they both become kodesh. It's this or that, but they're both kodesh. Oh, you're tempting me into Sof Vayikra because it's magnificent. Okay, fine, but it's certainly relevant, right? And then we'll stop, right? But but it's totally amazing because you look at Bechukosai, this book that started with Vayikra, and then it's explicit. Rashi said it's Vayikra, not Vayikir. Okay, it's Vayikra. Ends with Bechukosai talking all about like if you go with Keri with God, so then he's going to go with Keri with you. If you're not caring, so he's not going to be caring. If you're about the haphazard, then I'm going to be about the haphazard with you. Okay, so you better get this all very clear, very precise, very right. This is Bechukosai, and this is the covenant which I have made at Sinai with you in my Torot and my Chukot. And then dramatic ending. Sefer Vayikra seems to be over. And then, by the way, we have a couple of other rather undramatic things to tell you. You know, if you take an oath, then if you're a certain age, then you have a certain standard value. It doesn't matter who you are, no matter how valuable, you could be the most important person. Well, it doesn't matter. You're worth such and such shkalim, depends upon your age. And also, if you have an animal that's walked out of its pen and is the 10th, and you try to switch it with another one, so you should know any animal that actually was set up has been to Kodesh. So if you try to set up that as being Kodesh, then you know, and you can try to switch it with another one, they both become Kodesh. Okay, now we're ready to go. Bye. Wait a minute. Chazak, v'nit chazek. Man, like, come on. You just ruined it.
But it makes perfect sense.
It's absolutely perfect sense because there are always these two levels of reality. There's the function on which, mechanically speaking, you do this is what you get, this is the way it works. And then, by the way, there's a sub level here, which is, it's generic, you know? You could be the biggest Talmid Chacham in the world or the lowest guy. If you're 30 years old, this is what you're worth. Really? And, you know, if you do this and then you try to do that, then it's all going to go where it needs to go. Wait a minute. Didn't you tell me about it being all very precise and exact and personal and
Don't
everything?
look at it any other way, because otherwise that's how it'll
You're
happen.
out of it?
Yeah.
Yeah, I did say that. I know. Okay, bye. What? What? Well, didn't I tell you that I forever remain beyond the particulars of those details? And there's a selfhood that remains forever beyond those rules? Do you have a selfhood that's beyond those rules? That's willing to pass over on all the rules in order to get to something deeper? And if we would follow, you'd see the Maharal continues into a Gemara which explicitly talks about this, that lest there be Chilul Hashem, you can completely override the Torah. What? Yeah, you remember when the Givonim asked for the 7 children of Shaul to kill them? Were they allowed to do that? No. Were they Chayiv Misa? No. Should we kill them? Yes. Why? Because of Kiddush Hashem. Huh? Yeah, Mutav, she's Batel, Os Achas, which is a Lashon Nakiya of the Torah, lest there should be a Chilul Hashem. Well, huh? What? Yeah, because people are going to say, this is so beautiful, right? People are going to say, Goyim are going to say, what kind of a people is this? This is how they treat their Gerim? That Shaul caused the death of Givonim by destroying the Ir Nov? Forget about Nov, but the Givonim, they didn't have who to give, they didn't have anyone to take care of, who to sell stuff to anymore, So, yeah, that's right. And lest they say, and Rashi even brings like the Lashon Devekim, that this, the Gemara I think actually says that like the people lidavek b'hem. This is the people who are really lidavek b'hem. Will they see those who join them as having devekut with them, or are they just seeing some kind of a parochial vision of what it means to be a Yisrael in the world? If they have an expansive vision in which there can be a devekim b'hem, well, that's interesting. That means that they're actually bespeaking something that's beyond their own parochial commitment, their racial commitment to them. Now, that's an interesting people now. That's something else. But it comes about by a violation of Torah. That's what the Gemara says in Yevamos. Maybe we'll look at it, or just look at it in Yevamos Ayin Tes, right? So what? So the Maharal says, yeah, because that has to do with the nature of what it means to be Davek im HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So wait, are you saying that to the exclusion of Torah? No, I'm just letting you know that this is at once the way for us to meet in love, and also for you to know that if it ever becomes to you a vision that it's the only way, then you will have lost it being the way. To me.
It's in Yevamos. It talks about it's not the only, specifically about it not being the only way.
You got another brother?
Wait a minute, please. We don't need more details right now. I hope you appreciated what I just said. Because that's the sod of a relationship with Torah which remains alive, remains new, remains fresh, remains a contact with the voice that's beyond the words. It remains and becomes a contact with the creation itself in the deepest sense. A love that is a love which is a love for the universe, and most profoundly a love for the maker of the universe. That's what Torah becomes an avenue for, in the same way that your love for your wife, or a woman's love for her husband, becomes an avenue for a love of the universe. And if it's anything less than that, then it's less than what it can really what it's meant to be. And that okay, it's a little taste of Ruth, Naomi, of Kiddush Hashem, and Limud Torah, of Nisim, and maintaining the order, and of a love that becomes a portal into a relationship with the with the very self of HaKadosh Baruch Hu.
There's a bullet for me at the beginning that you said like
Yeah,
it used to
comments.
be miracles
Yeah.
and then it changed. It was also bias rishon and bias sheni, and in bias rishon there was this tension between
Many details.
and
Many details.
Beis Hamikdash.
Yes, there are other examples of this.